The sky that wasn't supposed to burn. At 1:43 a.m., the night sky over Ukraine was supposed to be quiet. Most people were asleep, wrapped in the calm of early morning. Streetlights hummed, the air was cool, and the silence felt almost protective. Then the silence shattered. Without warning, the ground began to tremble. A deep, distant rumble rolled in, growing louder with each second. Before anyone could react, streaks of fire cut across the sky. They weren't shooting stars. They were weapons, and they were headed straight for Ukrainian cities. In just seconds, 8 Russian cruise missiles roared into the country, followed closely by swarms of attack drones. The world would later learn that this was not an accident. It was a planned strike aimed not at soldiers in the field, but at the heart of civilian life. What happened over the next few minutes would leave deep scars on buildings, on families, and on the memory of an entire nation. The attack that changed the night. The missiles came from multiple directions, a coordinated effort meant to confuse defenses. Alongside them were hundreds of drones, a deadly mix of Lancets, Shaheds, and other loitering munitions, all moving like dark shadows under the cover of night. Air defense sirens blared, their wailing cries slicing through the dark. In cities and small towns, people scrambled from their beds, searching for shelter. Parents grabbed children. Elderly neighbors were helped downstairs. But in some places, there wasn't enough time. Ukrainian radar stations moved into action immediately. Anti-air systems fired, cutting through the darkness with streaks of light. Explosions echoed overhead as interceptors found their marks. Out of the hundreds of incoming threats, 61 drones were shot down. It was an impressive effort, but it wasn't enough. 6 of the 8 missiles found their targets. So did 16 drones. The results were devastating. Kherson, the hardest hit. One city took the brunt of the attack. Kherson, once a frontline battlefield, it had become a fragile recovery zone. Families there were rebuilding their lives, repairing homes, reopening schools, and trying to feel normal again. That night, normal vanished. Explosions tore through a school, a church, a hospital, and a residential block. A medical tent, set up to treat wounded soldiers and civilians, took a direct hit. Inside were doctors, nurses, and children recovering from earlier attacks. In seconds, the tent was nothing but burning fabric and twisted metal. The impact was more than physical, it was psychological. Survivors described it as a storm of screaming metal. Rescue workers dug through the rubble with their bare hands, using phone flashlights when power failed. Smoke stung their eyes, and the air was thick with dust and the smell of burning fuel. When the dust settled, 32 civilians were dead, none of them soldiers. 14 more were badly injured, many with severe burns and shrapnel wounds. Dozens were left homeless. The moment of resolve. In Kyiv, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky received the full casualty report. He listened quietly. Those present in the room said he stared at the floor for nearly a minute before speaking a single word: enough. This was not just another strike. It was a message, one written in steel and fire, meant to crush morale and break the spirit of the Ukrainian people. But instead of fear, it sparked determination. Planning the answer. By 5:10 a.m., an emergency meeting was underway in a secure military bunker beneath the presidential office. There were no speeches, no politics, only facts. Satellite images of the destruction filled the screens. Maps lit up with potential targets. Intelligence officers spoke in clipped tones. Ukraine did not have stealth bombers. It did not have stockpiles of billion-dollar missiles. But it had something else: ingenuity. The response would not come from NATO. It would come from Ukraine's own hands. The plan was bold, even risky. 270 homemade UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, each one built from commercial parts, scrap materials, and recycled explosives. The parts list sounded like something from a garage workshop. Motors from recreational drones, dash camera modules, cheap GPS chips, explosives salvaged from unexploded artillery shells, PVC piping and aluminum foil to reduce heat signature. The cost per drone, less than $600. But together, they would carry the power to cripple a critical Russian military asset. Choosing the target. The chosen target was the Sochi Strategic Oil Depot, a massive military fueling hub far from the front lines. It held over 1.4 million barrels of diesel and tank fuel, supplying armored units near the southern front. Hitting it would do more than cause an explosion. It would choke the Russian military's ability to move, to fight, and to supply its forces. It was a nerve center in Russia's war machine. The night of the strike. At 3:10 a.m. on August 2nd, 2025, while most of Sochi slept, the Ukrainian drones took flight. Flying low, they slipped past radar coverage, hugging the ground and weaving through gaps in electronic defenses. The first wave reached the depot 2 minutes later. At 3:12 a.m., the lead drone slammed into fuel tank 14C, a 280,000-barrel containment unit. The blast lit up the coastline like sunrise. The shockwave shattered windows across a 2-mile radius. Secondary explosions followed instantly as nearby fuel lines caught fire. Flames climbed over 200 feet into the air. Russian troops scrambled in chaos, some without boots, others trying to drag burning comrades to safety. But the drones kept coming. Over the next 7 minutes, waves of UAVs targeted fuel trucks, pumping stations, a tank servicing yard with a dozen T-90 battle tanks lined up for refueling. Several tanks exploded in place, their turrets blown into the air like coins flipped by a giant's hand. The aftermath in Sochi. By 3:19 a.m., radio contact from the depot went silent. When Russian firefighters finally arrived at 3:43, the flames were too intense to fight. Smoke rose more than 500 feet, visible from satellites passing above the Black Sea. The damage was staggering. Over 60% of the depot destroyed. Tens of millions of dollars in fuel lost. Southern Russian fuel logistics paralyzed for days. International news outlets ran the story with bold headlines. Ukraine hits, Russia where it hurts, declared one. Oil prices jumped nearly 8% overnight, the sharpest one-day spike since major Middle East refinery attacks years before. The message heard around the world. Military analysts were quick to label the attack a textbook case of asymmetric warfare, using low-cost improvised weapons to cause massive strategic damage. The numbers told the story. $150,000 in homemade drones, $320 million in direct damage to Russian assets. Weeks of disruption to frontline forces. Russia's belief that certain areas were untouchable, far from the front and protected by distance, was shattered in minutes. Why this story stays relevant. This wasn't just a story about one night or one war. It revealed something larger about modern conflict. Expensive defenses can be bypassed by creative low-cost tactics. Civilian infrastructure remains a target in today's wars. Speed, coordination, and ingenuity can rival sheer firepower. The events of that night also remind us of a truth that history has shown again and again. When people are pushed to the brink, their resourcefulness can change the course of a fight. The human side. For the people in Kherson, the memories are not about military strategy. They are about the faces they lost, the homes that vanished, and the quiet that never returned to their night. For the Ukrainian drone builders, the engineers, hobbyists, and mechanics who turned scraps into weapons, it was about proving that even without billion-dollar arsenals, they could strike back. For the world watching, it was a lesson in both the fragility and resilience of nations under attack. The lasting impact. In the months after, Russia was forced to move many of its fuel and ammunition stockpiles underground, slowing its operations and stretching its supply lines. Other countries took note. Military planners from Europe to Asia began reassessing how cheap, improvised drones could reshape battlefields. And somewhere in Ukraine, workshops kept building. More motors, more wiring, more GPS chip. The next wave was already taking shape. A night that redefined the war. The night of August 2nd, 2025 will be remembered for two things: the cruelty of an unprovoked attack and the brilliance of an unexpected counterstrike. It began with missiles meant to break a people's spirit. It ended with homemade drones tearing into the heart of a military giant's fuel supply. The message was clear: if you strike at our homes, we will strike at your strength. And in a world where technology keeps shrinking and ideas keep spreading, no base, no depot, no supply line can be considered safe forever.